Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Kevin Moran and I'm an assistant professor at George Mason University. I'm really excited to be here to talk a little bit about our work on investigating whether or not we can use image captioning to improve software documentation. So let's get right into it. So this project has been joint work from time when I was a postdoc at William & Mary, as well as an assistant professor at George Mason University. And this work would not have been made possible without the amazing team behind it that's been working on this really for a few years now. So to begin, I want to talk a little bit about the importance of software documentation. So on the screen right now, I have shown a PHP snippet. And if you look at this, and particularly if you're not familiar with PHP, it might not be clear immediately what is going on with this code. It's a little bit difficult to understand unless you are very, very familiar maybe with the project that the code was written in or the context of the code. Now, one important way that developers tend to comprehend software is through the use of comments and documentation within the software. So immediately, if I add this comment to this code, it becomes much more clear exactly what is going on here. Now, the value of this has not gone unnoticed by the software engineering research community. In fact, there has been many papers and years of work on building automated software documentation tools that will usually take as input some sort of code, run this through some sort of machine learning or prediction algorithm, and then aim to generate appropriate documentation for some sort of given software engineering task, whether it's summarizing methods or generating release notes or commit messages. Now, a little bit more recently, most of this work has tended to rely on neural machine translation as the medium or the tool for actually generating these comments or documentation. So the way that this typically works is you'll pass the text of, let's say, a method, if we were trying to generate comments for summarizing this method, into a trained neural machine translation model. And these models would be trained on parallel corpora of both code and natural language comments. And by training on many different pairs, we can essentially build models that, with some reasonable degree of accuracy, can actually predict, comments that, may be somewhat similar to what a human would write. And there has been much work on this, from generating commit messages to generating summaries, and even some work at last year's SANER on action word prediction for neural source code summarization. So this is a very rich area of work. However, this being said, it is not without its limitations. For example, there was recently a paper that was released called Code to Comment Translation: Data, Metrics, Baselining, and Evaluation. Now, what this paper did is they essentially tried to examine whether or not code to comment translation was a suitable problem for neural machine translation to actually tackle. And what they found was rather interesting. They saw that, natural language neural machine translation datasets show a much stronger input-output dependence than code to comment translation datasets. This was one of the main findings of the paper. Now, this essentially means or suggests that code to comment translation is likely more difficult via neural machine translation than natural language due to the information mismatch. That is, the lack of dependence between input and output pairs. So this is definitely one of the major problems that we face in automated software documentation research. Additionally, there was kind of a treatise on developer documentation that was released a few years ago that essentially set forth some important future research directions for the community as a whole. And I want to highlight two of these here. So these are: we need techniques that are able to infer undocumented program properties, that is, properties that may not explicitly exist in the code, as well as discovering new, different, latent or hidden abstractions and rationales for explaining how software works. So in essence, this suggests that we need to find new techniques and new data sources to discover these hidden abstractions to provide more information and to further advance software documentation. Now, with this being said, where does our research come in? So our key idea is that we can take the information that's encoded into graphical user interfaces and use this to infer this additional functionality and to help bridge this abstraction gap for code to comment translation. So when you look at a user using a mobile device, for example, you can glance at the UI and intuitively understand many of the different features that exist. And this is basically where we want to come in. If humans can glance at these user interfaces, infer use cases, that means likely there are hidden patterns that will allow us to infer these same types of functionalities that may not be explicitly mentioned or encoded into the code or other software artifacts that exist in a repository themselves. So we aim to do this through neural image captioning. So there's been much work that's been done on this for just general image categories, and you can see some of the successes of this work here, where it's describing somebody playing a guitar, people performing sports, animals performing activities. And as you can see, these models have become fairly good. We have very, very powerful representations and representational learning for images that makes this possible. So our idea is basically to take this and transfer it to the domain of user interfaces. So with this, given a user interface, we aim to actually predict two main types of captions. First, a high-level caption. And something like this screen allows the user to look at different clothing categories in this clothing application. But also, we want to be able to infer lower level captions. And these are mainly concerned with functionalities of some of the different components or widgets that exist on a given screen. So this is where we introduce our project that we call Clarity. And there's 4 main steps that we took in this paper to investigate whether neural image captioning could be used as a viable source of software documentation information. So first, one of the most challenging aspects of this project is that there was no, really large parallel corpora of screenshots and, metadata of user interfaces and corresponding natural language descriptions. So the first step that we took was a very large scale dataset collection for a dataset that we are calling the Clarity dataset. So to do this, we needed a place to start. We needed a large number of screenshots. So we took advantage of the redraw dataset. Now this dataset was essentially mined from different software repositories where, a automated mining infrastructure was set up to download Android applications and then automatically execute them on an execution engine. Then as these applications were being executed, screenshots and metadata that delineate the hierarchy of the different GUI components and some of the kind of positional and other attributes about them were mined during this process. So we took this redraw dataset, which contains 17,203 screenshots and also corresponding metadata for each of those screenshots. Then we did a pilot study to see, what are some of the challenges might be in actually labeling these with natural language descriptions of their functionality. So during this pilot study, we found that there were many screens that either didn't really display anything, were kind of blank or didn't have a lot of functionality, or had some, overlays or things that might have confused our image captioning models. So we did a manual filtering and we looked at every single of the 17,203 screenshots and we filtered out all of those that weren't really displaying some reasonable form of functionality. This left us with 16,311 candidate screenshots. From here, we uploaded a number of human intelligence tasks to Mechanical Turk, where 2,150 Mechanical Turk workers essentially labeled these screenshots with those different levels of granularity that I was talking about earlier. Then, and this was very important and very, very time consuming, we performed a manual quality check on every single label that or every single caption that the Mechanical Turk workers produced. and we discarded several thousand low quality captions. So we really worked hard to make sure that this is a high quality data set. And in the end, we were very happy to have almost 46,000 captions for over 10,204 screens, which serves as a nice base for our investigation into whether we can actually use these screenshots to infer program functionality. So here's a brief glance at some of the high-level captions that exist. So as you can see, they range from things like shopping applications to setting screens, login screens, video player screens, photo editing screens. We have quite a bit of diversity within this data set. And here you can see some of the lower level ones. And these, typically describe different components, whether it's a back button, OK button, a field to enter your email, different controls for editing a photo, uploading, information to an app, many of these different things. And as you can see, we have quite a bit of diversity in this data set here as well. So in the spirit of open science, and hopefully encouraging the community to pursue additional work on this, this entire data set is open source and open access, and we have uploaded it to Zenodo, hopefully to facilitate not only replications of our work, but future work in this direction as well. Okay, so that's how we collected the Clarity dataset, which was a multi-year major research effort from this team. Next, we wanted to get a better understanding of the different captions that we actually mined and how feasible it might actually be to actually learn patterns from these captions. So we did two things. We did a cross-entropy analysis and also an LDA-based topic analysis. So for the cross-entropy analysis, we took the captions that we collected from our Clarity dataset, as well as some kind of standard corpora for both code and natural language. We trained n-gram-based language models on these, and we essentially, using tenfold cross-validation, collected a measure of cross-entropy similar to other works in software engineering that have done similar things. And what we found was actually very, very interesting. So in essence, the blue and the yellow lines that you see are the cross-entropy of our captions from the Clarity dataset. And here, the lower the cross-entropy, the more kind of repetitive or the stronger the patterns that exist within a given data set. So you can see that our data set is far more repetitive than a traditional natural language data set like the Gutenberg corpus. And while it's not quite as repetitive as the raw Java code corpus, we can see that there are definite salient patterns that we can use hopefully to predict reasonable amounts of information and of functionality here. So for the topic modeling analysis, we took the Clarity captions, we ran them through an LDA-based topic modeling technique, and we then just examined the main caption topics. So what we found was, we looked at both the high-level and the low-level captions. And essentially what we found was we captured quite a diversity of different topics and, different captions within the data set. Everything from having different types of color options to, logging in or creating an account, selecting images, as well as different lower level buttons like page button, select date, camera button, etc. So that was our naturalness and topic analysis. So next, we actually wanted to train some models and see how they worked in practice. So to do this, we trained both image captioning and metadata captioning models. So let's jump in and see, exactly how we did this. So first, we wanted to train, image captioning models where we were able to give an input image. This gets encoded using some sort of CNN or RCNN, and we essentially encode this into a high-dimensional vector space. And then we use a natural language decoder to essentially go from this high-dimensional vector space to a sequence of natural language-based tokens, and we can train the model using the images and captions that we collected in the Clarity dataset. Now, in addition to this, we can also use, instead of an image as input, the metadata, the screen metadata, that denotes the hierarchy and different attributes of the components on the screen. When we actually feed this to the model, and again, this is much simpler because we can use an encoder-decoder model, as I'm about to explain. So for the image captioning models, we used three base models. First, we used show, attend, and tell. This was our kind of most recent model that uses an RNN with attention over the image, as well as combined with convolutional feature extraction. We used Neural Talk 2, and this was probably one of the earlier image captioning models that exists, that was developed by some researchers at Stanford. And also we used the Im2Text framework, and this is basically an advancement over Neural Talk 2 that was developed by Google. So we had a few different treatments because we wanted to examine how these models worked in different settings. So our first treatment was just pre-training on a general image dataset such as ImageNet. The second one is pre-trained on ImageNet, but then fine-tuned on our redraw dataset with only cropped images, so cropped images of components. Finally, we had models that were pre-trained on ImageNet and then fine-tuned on redraw's full screen dataset. So that is essentially the entire screen, and the way that we trained this was in a self-supervised manner by having a convolutional neural network try to classify these into their different Google Play categories. So those are our image captioning models. So as I mentioned before, we also collected screen metadata for each of the screenshots in the redraw dataset. And you can see a representation of this for a few different components on the screen here: the three dots button at the top right, the new button, and the abstract text there. So as you can see, we get lots of different information, such as the type of component, its location on the screen, the text related to the component, things like this. So in order to train a model to predict natural language captions based on this information, to see if, do we really need the visual pixel-based information, or can we use this metadata information? We essentially take this metadata, we feed it through a seek-to-seek encoder-decoder model, and then from here we produce or predict the natural language captions. So we also had some different treatments for the metadata captioning models. And this includes using different GUI component types, using only the GUI component text, using the types plus text together, and then finally using the types plus the text plus the location. We want to see, does any of these different representations actually impact the overall accuracy? So we essentially asked two main research questions to evaluate these models. First, what is the overall accuracy of these models according to a common machine translation metric? And then second, what is the accuracy, completeness, and understandability as rated by humans? So to answer research question one, we took the Clarity dataset. We segmented this into training, validation, and test splits, 80-10-10. We fed these through our trained neural image captioning models, and we essentially calculated the blue scores based on the reference ground truth captions. And these are the overall results that we received. So some of the main takeaways from this. So basically here you have the base model, the caption, whether it was predicting high, low, or a combined caption that we added, basically training on predicting both the high and the low level, as well as the configuration of the model itself. And then you'll see 5 different blue numbers. There's a composite blue score, which is essentially the average of blue 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then you have just the normal blue metrics. So important things to take away from this. So first is that the seek-to-seek model operating on the metadata did not perform very well. In fact, it really didn't even converge for the high-level captions. The show, attend, and tell model, the SAT model in this table, performed the best overall for all configurations. And if we look at the low level in the combined captions, we also have included some results from other models on other datasets, such as Flickr 8K and MS Coco. And as you can see, some of the accuracies that we're seeing here for the composite blue score for the low level and the combined captions are approaching some of the levels that these models tend to get on other different types of natural language datasets, or just kind of general image captioning datasets. So what this tells us is this is very promising. We can actually predict some reasonable captions using this process. So next we wanted to understand, okay, so automated reference-based metrics are great, but there's growing skepticism in the machine learning community on their efficacy. So we wanted to actually see, how would humans actually rate the output of these models? We took our data set. Again, we did the training to validation test split, ran them through our models, took the predicted captions, uploaded additional tasks to Amazon Mechanical Turk, went through a manual quality check to essentially remove answers that were incomplete or were just not of high quality. And then we basically analyzed the questions that we asked the Mechanical Turk users about the captions describing different screenshots. So these are the results that we had. We essentially asked three main questions. One, what was the accuracy? Two, what was there any unnecessary information? And then three, how understandable they were. So here, these are the results for the Image model, which was one of our better performing models overall. And as we can see, for the accuracy, users were, neutral to negative in terms of the overall accuracy of, some of the different generated captions, with the high-level captions getting the best score. Users encouragingly, didn't see that there was a lot of unnecessary information. And luckily, they also found that, in general, the captions were fairly easy to read overall, with the high-level captions, again, being the easiest to read. So what's interesting here is that even though we saw, the worst overall blue performance for the high-level captions, these were the ones that were rated highest by our human participants. Now, we have a few different, salient lessons learned here. So first is that functional descriptions of GUIs exhibit a high degree of naturalness. And this means that, we can likely model these and predict functionality of software in a meaningful way. Our studied models benefited from domain-specific fine-tuning. So that is, the models that were fine-tuned on our domain-specific redraw corpora ended up doing better than those that weren't. Something else that we saw in examining some of the different predictions of both the screenshot models and the metadata models is that they appear to have a degree of orthogonality. That is, one is able to predict some information, the other is able to predict other information. So likely we can combine these two information sources together in order to predict even more, higher fidelity captions. Finally, what we found is it is very difficult to predict specific or diverse pieces of functionality. So the things that our model was able to predict best were things that it saw very, commonly in the data set. So these would be things like login screens or back buttons, for example, were very common. And it can be difficult to kind of encourage the model to predict, explanations of different types of GUI components for, different parts of different screens. So in the spirit of open science, again, we have a very comprehensive website and online appendix for this project with essentially all of the data information, detailed results that I didn't have time to go into this presentation that are included in the paper, and even some results that we couldn't fit within the paper itself. So in addition to having the Clarity dataset on Zenodo, we also make all of our code, models, and data freely available on GitHub. So we hope that the community will kind of take this and run with it and really explore this area of research even further, because we feel that it holds a lot of promise. So you can find our online appendix at sagelab.io/clarity, or you can use the QR code on the screen to be taken directly there. So with that, thank you for your attention. I hope that you found this interesting and that the software documentation research community really looks to harness the power and the information that's contained within graphical user interfaces to advance this area of research. Thank you very much.